Okay, before the lunch break, we were talking about institutions, starting with the question, what is law? How is law made? Both at the national level and at an EU level. And now let's continue with some questions in order to identify one of the core principles of the European Union. So maybe let's start with the last question, because that's what this picture is referring to. That was from a news of Politico, where it was stated the European Commission questions Disneyland's ticket prices. And so the question basically is the following: should Italians be treated like French people, meaning that they get cheaper tickets in Disneyland Paris? What's the answer of an Italian? Sure. Sicuro? What about? Depends. So it depends. It would be a typical lawyer's question. Depend on what?
I think, for example, they have to have the same price. They are European members.
So they should pay the same price.
Yes.
So your answer to the last question is a strong yes. They should pay the same price for the same entry into Disneyland Paris. Yeah? What about the first one? Should women earn as much as men? Yes, of course. So again, a strong yes.
If you transport, it depends from the job.
Yeah, but in the same job.
So
If they are capable to do the same.
it's very good if you actively.
For example, we could pay a
Stop. So now you have woken up. Just very briefly, as you know, the only microphone here in the room for our colleagues back at home is mine. So I just need to repeat your statement so that our colleagues can follow us. So again, your statement, you say it depends, but it depends on what?
Depends from for example, if there is a profession in which there are some features that are characteristic for women or for men, is not equal to pay the same.
Okay, but if let's talk about the same job that's done.
So jobs that can be comparable, of course.
Okay, so same payment, yeah, yeah. Of course, agree, yeah, yeah. So next question: should women pay equally less at the hairdresser such as men? And I assume, let's take you. If you go to the hairdresser, how much do you pay?
I don't pay usually, but
Okay.
but in Italy I can pay 18 euros.
18 euros, yeah. The ladies, how much on average?
In Italy, 25.
25, the ladies, yeah. More.
20, yes, only cash.
I assume that can go up to 80, 100 euros, depending if you want to change your hair color. So the question is that discrimination if they charge a different price? No? And why not?
As I said, it's more women haircut is more complicated.
So it takes more time. Haircut for women, it takes more effort, maybe more resources. So therefore, you'd say that's okay. Women agree?
In many hairdressers, at least in your way, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. It depends on because there are men who have long hair, so it depends on your.
Or
hair.
women who have short hair, yeah.
Or women with
Yeah.
short hair.
So you say it depends on the length of your hair or how much time and effort it takes.
Depending on where you go to. Right?
Of course, depending where you go, it could be more or less expensive, yeah. Similar as for Disneyland Paris, who of you has already gone skiing this season here in Tyrol? Yeah? Yeah? So 4 at least. So maybe you've already realized that depending on your residence and in real terms depending on your dialect, whether you speak a Tyrolean dialect, a German dialect, or if you speak a foreign language, that you would end up paying different prices again for the same service, skiing or snowboarding for 1 day or half a day, whatever. What about this question? And now we have also one Austrian. So should Germans pay the same price for skiing in Austria and Austrians the same price for swimming in Germany? And basically, the reason why I've selected those countries is due to the fact that there have been, or there has been a court case concerning the second situation decided by a German court, again based on EU law. And the first situation, that's a very frequent situation here in Austria, but so far there has not been any court case, which does not mean that there would not be a legal answer to that question, but just according to your perspective. So you're, I think, the only Austrian.
Well, to be quite honest, that's something I was never thinking about.
Okay.
If I should, I don't know.
So is it justified, is it okay that if a group of people goes skiing or snowboarding, whatever, that although they are skiing in the same ski resort on the same day, for the same length, let's say a full day or half a day, they end up paying different prices?
I think that's discrimination.
Discrimination?
Nationality. Yeah, if you're part of the European Union, then it's the same. You're a European citizen, not French or German.
Okay, so you say it's discrimination, and that's not okay because you're EU, or because the people of this group, let's assume, are EU citizens. But like in your case, if you're from Uruguay, the question, would it be okay if you pay a different price?
That wouldn't be
Okay, yeah.
But if it's like that for Europeans, one thing, and for non-Europeans another thing, then I think it's more understandable that difference. than
Okay, it's
between
more understandable than
Europeans.
between.
Yeah, you are part of the same community.
Okay, so you say it's more understandable if we take Uruguay and Austria maybe for one situation. Second situation, someone from Italy and someone from Austria.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's okay, but
But more understandable, yeah? What about the fact that someone from Innsbruck, and that happened to me once, going to the glacier at Stubaital, someone from Innsbruck pays more than someone from the valley where the glacier is actually located. Is that okay?
I think it's okay.
Okay? Because you say if you take Uruguay and EU countries, it's not okay. Or maybe it's more okay, but still can be a problem. If we compare Italy and Austria, for example, it should not be okay. But what if it happens within one country? One guy from Innsbruck and one guy from Fultmes or any other village which is located in the valley next to the glacier.
To give how can I say, a framework for this, I will say there are some local services that is correct to make the local people to pay less.
Yeah?
But it's not fair if you make a discrimination between the people who comes from abroad from different places. For example, if I say only the people from Stubai pay less for skiing on the glaciers and all the others pay more and all the others pay the same price, it's okay. If I start say, okay, if you come from Germany, you pay this fee. If you come from Spain, you pay this fee. If you come from Poland, you pay this fee.
Yeah.
And this is every time different and it's not fair.
So just to summarize your statement, I say if it's about local services, then it would be okay. But otherwise, if you just randomly differentiate based on the country the person is coming from, then it's not okay. So therefore, my question would be, what do you consider to be a local service? Touristic?
Facilities.
Touristic? Winter sport? Winter sport, so that it would be okay if you as an Italian are charged a higher price than me as an Austrian?
If I ski in Austria, yes. And
Yeah.
if you come to Italy to ski,
It's also okay.
yes.
Yeah. But in which way is that different to Disneyland Paris? So our first example. That's the question, if it's different, yeah? Let's go to the next one. Should homosexuals be treated in the same way as heterosexuals? For example, when it comes to assisted reproductive technologies, such as in vitro fertilization or surrogacy contracts, which we're going to discuss in one of our next sessions.
This has been an important topic in my country.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
And how can if I have to give my opinion is that when you talk about the regulation that is affect a particular community, I think it's correct to ask the opinion of the whole community. There is my answer is there is not an answer to this question.
Okay, your answer is now with regard to Italy, there is no answer to this question, and the question should be addressed to the whole community, meaning to all Italians. And this does this imply that we would need a referendum,
Yeah.
for example? So you say that's one of the examples, like we had it in the morning. If you change the basic, the most important principles of a constitution, like it's the case in Austria, you need a referendum because the constitution requires it. And here you will argue it's an equally important question, so therefore that would also require the a referendum, so that you ask the citizens. Yeah. What about the last question, and let me slightly modify it. If we would all go to the cinema, maybe I would end up paying a higher price than you would for the very same film. Same movie on the same day, but most likely I would pay a higher price than you. Okay or not okay?
Why?
Because you get a student's discount. And I'm not a student anymore, so therefore I would end up paying a higher price.
Well, you have more money than us. So.
That's the assumption. So if the longer you work in a certain field, the more money you were able to have saved. On the other hand, working, I'm not saying that you're not working, but for your work, for your struggle, you actually have to pay, and I am lucky for getting paid for my work. So is it okay? And also another question, which is often very much related to this topic. In a lot of countries, or for a lot of fields, or different questions, if you are above 27, so let's say you're still studying, but you happen to be older than 27. I think that's not the case for any one of you, or younger than 27. So you would be students still, studying the same courses, but you would not get certain grants because you're older than 27. Is that discrimination based on age? And that's what this example, my cinema example, what they are addressing, or is that okay?
No, it's a financial question.
It's a financial question?
Because it earns money to states to pay for students, and if they would say, okay, you can be student for your whole life and we'll pay for it, they would it wouldn't be like states would lose too much money.
Okay, you say in case of students, if you have a cap of 27 years, so that you assume someone starting at 18, 19, maybe 20 years, so that would still give that person 7 years for studying, and that would be okay.
Yeah, I don't think it should be about age. In Finland we have a fixed amount of months you're allowed to get the grant,
Yeah?
and that's fair.
Okay.
That's not fair.
Okay. So one statement from Finland arguing that it should be the financial grants that you get, and it was your argument that the state cannot pay for an unlimited number of years, so that the financial grant should be limited to certain months, years, and that would be the same for everyone. And very interesting, you stated that this, in your eyes, would be more fair. And just noting that because we're coming back to this concept of fairness later on. And most likely all of us would agree, yes, maybe it's fairer if you say it's for a certain amount of years, and no matter at which age you start, you would always have the same number of years where you would get that financial grant. So all those questions basically are concerned about equal treatment if you put it in a positive way, or non-discrimination if you put it in a negative way. And the question is always, what is discrimination? And of course we have already seen that all those examples, and of course that's no coincidence, relate to different criteria that are being used in order to differentiate. But nevertheless the question is, what is discrimination? Of course discrimination already entails a negative connotation. So, as you can see from that judgment of the European Court of Justice, and I quote, in that respect it should be noted that according to settled case law, discrimination can arise only through the application of different rules to comparable situations, or of the application of the same rule to different situations. So if you have two similar situations, but if you treat them in a different way, that would be discrimination. Equally as if you have two different situations and you treat them in the same way. And what's the key question then, having this definition? Well, the key question is, what are similar or comparable, or what are different situations? And in this regard, the court has continued in another case, in a Bulgarian case. It should be recalled that the requirement relating to the comparability of the situation for the purpose of determining whether there is a breach of the principle of equal treatment, or again, in other words, non-discrimination, must be assessed in the light of all the elements which characterize them. And although that's a clear definition, but I think all of us will agree that it will be very difficult to decide whether actually we are facing discrimination in a certain case or not, or in other terms, if two situations are really comparable or not. Going back to our example of women paying more or less if they go to the hairdresser, if the criterion is really the length of the hair or the time it takes, if you transfer minutes into euros, then that's objective, and then this would be okay. On the other hand, if you really have comparable situations, but simply due to the fact that you are a woman, you pay a higher price, then it would not be okay. And so, again, although assessing whether two situations are really comparable, I mean, that's the tricky part, but although that's the case, you could summarize it in the following way. So if the situation of A is similar as the situation of B, then you should treat A in the same way as B. And if the situation of A and B, if they are not the same, then you also shouldn't treat A in the same way as you treat B. So again, what does this mean for those questions? Now, as we have the clarification, so to say, but what does it mean for all those questions? Are the situations comparable? And if yes, then we know that A and B should be treated in the same way. Again, no matter which criteria are used in this context, and if it's not the same, then it's legally okay if we treat them in a different way. What about this question?
The problem is that it's really easy to say that A is different than B. Then you can treat A differently than how you treat B. And the problem is we have to fix something to say like A is equal to B in this kind of situation, or just say that homosexuals are human beings like heterosexuals. And then we should treat A like B. But the hard thing is to prove that they are the same, I think.
So
each question is like it.
Okay, you say this mathematical formula sounds very easy and maybe compelling, but applying that to different fields, there we face problems. If objectively the situation of A and B are similar, or at least if a certain society argues, and you were referring to the opinion of a certain society, if they agree that situations of A and B really are similar. Yeah. In the next session, and that's just an outlook, we are going to have a look at affirmative action, as you know, and what's affirmative action in comparison to non-discrimination? What does it mean, affirmative action? If that would be, let's just assume the number of men working in a certain job, whatever you like, and that's the number of women working in this field, in this sector, so same kind of job. What could it be affirmative action? If non-discrimination means that women may not be rejected for a certain job, or that they should not be paid less than men, again for the same job. If that's non-discrimination, what could it be affirmative action?
Try to same number, so that
Exactly. And so how could you try to adjust the numbers so that in the end we have the same, in this case, amount of men and women working in the same job? How could we achieve that objective?
in setting implementations like low like I don't know how to say that. Yeah, grants.
So financial grants, yeah. Financial grants, yeah.
For the firms who hire women.
So grants for companies that hire women. What else?
Grants for some studies that could lead women to.
Okay, so even one step before, so they're not only grants for companies that hire women, but also grants for women that they study or make any other training that is a prerequisite for that kind of job. Yeah, what else?
I can fix a quote and say you have to hire a certain amount of women.
Exactly, so quota, yeah. Quota would be another possibility. So basically, and I think there are some countries that have quota for the access of women to certain jobs. So that would all be examples of affirmative action, so that you don't prohibit to discriminate according to a certain criteria, for example, sex, but that you actively differentiate, and I'm not using the term discrimination, but that you actively differentiate as long as a certain balance has been struck. And that's affirmative action, and that's what we are going to see in our next session. So therefore I can cut short on affirmative action. And now if we come to the legal field, and we still need to talk about fairness, another concept. But if we talk about the legal field, you can see there are certain provisions of EU law that prohibit discrimination, and you already pointed out to that. So for example, in Article 18 TFEU on EU citizenship, and that's the concept that you mentioned, so Austrians and Italians should not be treated in a different way because they are all EU citizens. There it states, and I quote, within the scope of application of the treaties, so when EU law applies, and we have already seen that EU law, so this vertical distribution of competencies, plays a role in certain fields, but not in all. And without prejudice to any special provisions, so those are basically only other provisions of EU law that prohibit discrimination. And then it continues, any discrimination on grounds of nationality shall be prohibited. So there, if we talk about this concept of an EU citizenship, which was introduced by the Maastricht Treaty in 1992, there we know that if you're an EU citizen, you should not be discriminated based on nationality. Now what does that mean for our examples?
Italian people should pay the same as French.
Exactly, Italians, people should pay the same price, but most likely according to which criterion have they been discriminated? According to which criteria have they been discriminated? If they wanted to visit Disneyland Paris, do you think they have had to show their passport? Maybe,
No, maybe.
but there is another.
The language.
Language, yeah. What other criteria are some often used? Appearance, yeah. Language, because language can identify where you're coming from. Not always necessarily, but sometimes. No, in a lot of cases they use the criteria of residence, and we are going to see tomorrow in the second session on affirmative action that sometimes we face situations of open discrimination. Sometimes there are similar criteria that are used, which we qualify as disguised discrimination, and in this case, as it's stated here, that would be open discrimination based on nationality. Those special provisions that I mentioned here you have one example. So when we talk about the free movement of workers, and you mentioned before, if you are qualified in a certain job for a certain job because you have been trained in Italy, you've studied in Italy, that your qualification should also be recognized in another country. So here we find the provision for that topic, where it states free movement of workers shall entail the abolition of any discrimination based on nationality between workers of the member states with regard to employment, remuneration, and any other conditions of work. So, as you can see, we have principle of non-discrimination, special ones for workers, for the provision of services, establishment, and so on, products, but also a general one on EU citizenship. And that's one category or criteria according to which it's not allowed to discriminate. But we can see that those are not the only criteria, and also in our examples there have been different ones. So as it's stated here in another provision in Article 19, the EU shall combat discrimination based on sex, racial or ethnic origin, religion or belief, disability, or age or sexual orientation. And basically, now you can see why the examples have been drafted as you have just seen them. So those are the criteria according to which discrimination should not happen. Again, always keeping in mind the definition of discrimination. If A is like B, treat A like B. If A is not like B, don't treat A in the same way as you treat B. Now, for this second field, so for this one, if we have a closer look on this, you can see that there are different sectors or different fields, and there are different, again, those different criteria which can be used in order to differentiate. And again, differentiation is the more neutral term. Discrimination always implies that it's illegal. So you can see we have here employment, vocational training, education, the provision or receiving goods and services, and social protection. And then we have different criteria: race, religion, disability, so what has been mentioned in Article 19. And as you can see, there are different directives, and some of those directives we will again see if we are going to discuss surrogacy contracts. So you can see, for example, there's one directive, that's the number of this directive, that forbids discrimination based on race or ethnic origin in all 4 fields that have been identified here. We have one which is about non-discrimination according to several criteria in the field of employment and vocational training. We have one which is about equal treatment of men and women when it comes to the provision of goods and services. And we have another one on equal treatment based on sex when it comes to employment and vocational training. What is missing? All the boxes where it says no. And as you can see here, as this is still quite a big area where we don't have any provision yet, so no EU directive, so such an example of secondary EU law, as we've discussed it in the morning. So there is a broad field of examples where we don't have any provisions that prohibit discrimination based on those criteria. And as you can see down here, what we have discussed in the morning, if you remember the legislative procedure, it always requires a proposal of the European Commission. Yes, we have this proposal from July 2008. And what happens next, or what should happen next? Once the Commission has presented its proposal, what should happen next? The Council and?
First reading of the Council and approval.
So yeah, we know whether it's the first or the second reading, but we need the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament. And those two have to agree, and we have discussed it in the morning. So in Parliament, the 751 members of Parliament, coming from different countries, having different political backgrounds, they need to agree. And inside the Council, the 28 ministers, also they have to agree. And only if both institutions agree, then we have an adoption of that proposal. And in this case, that's not yet the case, as you can see. And it was also mentioned in one of the videos that on average it takes 12, 14 months for this legislative procedure. Well, here you can see that's way more than 1 year, so we still have no adoption. So here you can see there is still a large field where we don't have any provisions, although they would be required. Have a guess, what might be the reason, the political reason, why we don't have the adoption of that proposal for a directive? What might be the reason?
There are many differences in beliefs between the countries in the European Union.
Yeah. Do you happen to know just to repeat it, so you stated that there are a lot of different beliefs in the 28 member states. Do you happen to know the motto of the European Union? Does anyone know? What's the motto of the European Union?
Integration,
No, integration is a very important principle, or the EU can be seen as one example of integration, and I mentioned Mercosur and others before. The motto, the leitmotif, so to say, of the European Union. Yeah?
Was it something like diversity in unity?
The other way around?
Unity in diversity?
United in diversity, yes. So that's the motto of the European Union, and as you can see, of course, we have certain common rules that are uniform, like the principle of non-discrimination, but still we face a lot of diversity, and now we could talk about a lot of topics. If you just read the newspapers, you would find a lot of topics where the United Union is more diverse than being united, and that is one reason, yeah, so there might be no consensus amongst the 28 countries, and again, the 28 countries can lead to the fact that we don't have a majority in the parliament, and the same for the council. What else could be a reason why we don't have a consensus for that topic? Well, if you are a company, no matter if you provide education, goods, services, whatsoever, of course, there is one main principle that you find in a lot of legal orders, and that's the principle of private autonomy. If I want to conclude a contract with you and sell you my mobile phone or not sell you my mobile phone, and at a certain higher or lower price, basically that's my free decision. So that's what we call the principle of private autonomy. You don't need to buy your food in a certain supermarket or your clothes in a certain shop. That's your free choice. You can also say, no, I'm not buying certain products. That's your free decision. So that's the one principle. And on the other side, we have the principle of non-discrimination. So therefore, as always, the challenge is to find a balance between the principle that you are free to conclude a contract with whomever you want, or the principle that you should not discriminate based on those criteria. And as this applies to a large number of possible cases, that's basically the reason why the institutions have not yet found a compromise, because it's very difficult to strike that balance between those competing interests, private autonomy and discrimination on the other side. What is missing? That's the question, if it would be possible to discriminate based on sex in the field of education, just because there is no directive, but without going into details, I assume that if there would be such a case, the court would find, the European Court of Justice would find a way to prohibit non-objective discrimination based on sex in the field of education. So now I have a little task for you. So those are the examples that we have seen at the beginning. Now try to categorize the grounds which have been used for discrimination and the fields as we have just seen them. Okay. The same task for you here in the classroom and for the others at home. very briefly try to go through these examples in groups of 2 at maximum and try to categorize the different grounds that have been used for discrimination and the different fields. Okay? I think 2 minutes should be enough. You can also form a group of 3. So fields that refers to those sectors and the criteria up here. Finished? No?
Yeah, that's true.
Finished? Yeah. So what about the first one? First question or first example? Sex. Sex and employment, yeah. So that's easy. Next one. Sex, goods and services, yeah. Next one. Race, goods and services. Nationality, goods and services, yeah. What would be race, ethnic origin, and of course the term race in itself can be seen as problematic, although that's the official term that is being used. But what could be discrimination based on race? And
color.
Black and white.
sorry,
Skin color.
skin color, yeah.
Or, for example, ethnic, like Indians or
Indians, yeah.
Asians.
Yeah.
That's race.
So indigenous, for example, yeah. Can you imagine any other examples? And basically, there have been cases recently concerning another example. For example, the treatment of Roma, people of Roma origin. There was a case in Bulgaria, and that's the case that has been mentioned here. A case from last year, 2015. Let me very briefly tell you about this case. In Bulgaria, so this company here, that's a company providing electricity in Bulgaria. And this company was of the opinion that in certain districts in Bulgaria, of certain villages, with a certain percentage of people of Roma origin, that people tried to steal electricity, basically. So I'm simplifying it. And so what they did, and you have to know that normally electricity is provided in cables which have a height of, let's say, less than 2 meters. So what they did, they only in those districts put the cables providing electricity at an altitude so that no one could reach it. And that was only used in districts where there was a majority of Roma people, or people from Roma origin. And in this case, that was a question whether that's discrimination based on ethnic origin of race. In this case, if it's really about the nationality, your citizenship, so your passport, so to say, then it would be the question whether that's discrimination based on nationality. So race and ethnic origin, the examples that we have had so far were about Roma. What about the next example?
Sex and social protection.
Sorry?
Sexual orientation and social protection.
Yeah. Social protection. Or the question is, and again, we're going to answer this question in one of our next sessions, if that should consider to be a service, similar as you receive the service of being educated now, or if you go skiing. So if those examples should be qualified as services. Again, that's a question that we still need to answer. Next example. Age and employment, yeah, that's easy. And last but not least.
Nationality and goods and services.
Exactly, nationality and services. So I think all of those examples should be clear, but the question whether those treatments of assisted reproductive technologies, whether they should be seen as services or not, that we still need to figure out. So it has already been mentioned fairness, and so therefore let's now turn to fairness and justice. Has any one of you ever been to the United States, to Washington, D.C.? No? Yeah. Have you seen there's a U.S. Supreme Court, the building? Yeah. Have you also?
Visited? No.
No. But do you happen to know what is written up here?
No.
Yeah. Most likely not. Yeah. Up here it's written, and we talked about the motto of the European Union, United in Diversity. Here the motto seems to be equal justice under law. And so you were using the term of fairness, justice on the one side and law on the other side. And so now we need to figure out how those two concepts, how they relate to each other. And again, while I'm talking, you can access the same webpage we were using in the morning, Pingo. Nevertheless, in the meantime, let me explain the example. Consider the following example. There are 3 children, and suppose you only have 1 flute to give to one of those 3 children. Which child should receive the one and only flute? So don't try to find a workaround that they should share the flute or whatever. you really need to decide if you give the one and only flute to child A, B, or C. Here you have different reasons why you should give the flute to one of those kids, and so so if you again. So again, the web page it's it's pingo.upb.de, and again it's the same number that you need to enter 969 375. Yeah.
Please wait for the start.
Yeah, wait for the start because I just want to make sure that everyone has access to the web page. Are you ready? Okay. So take your time and state whether it should be A or B or C. So far, no one has voted. Okay, let's see the results. So no one of you has been in favor of Anne. And Anne would be the one who knows to play the flute. So that was no argument for you. We have 42% who were in favor of Bob because he's the only child who has no toy on his own yet. And 58% were in favor of Carla because she has produced the flute. Surprising to you? No?
There's generosity and
Generosity, capitalism. Sorry?
It's for the property. Carla made it.
Yeah.
Carla is the owner.
you made it as a gift.
Yeah, you
take
can
this
also
and you
make
And I
can
give to another
you can
person.
also make a child happy.
I can give it to Bob if I give a compensation to Carla for his produce.
Yeah.
Well, then feminism.
So just to summarize.
You tell Bob, okay, give her some money.
If I am the mom, I will give the money to Carla maybe and the flute to Bob.
Yeah. But again, I said you should not try to find workarounds because that gets us away from the problem. So if I may summarize it, your approach is the following. The one who is the owner of the product, who has produced it in this case, should also be the one who gets the flute. Yeah. So of course we can have a legal solution to this case, but if it's like the mother giving her property to one of the children, then of course it would not be so much a legal challenge, because if it's her property, as I mentioned before, private autonomy means you can do with your property whatever you want. You can conclude a contract, you cannot conclude a contract, you can give it to A, B or C, so that would not be a problem from a legal perspective. So the question is, under justice or fairness, what would be the compelling solution? And now, and maybe that's more of a challenge for lawyers than for you. In law, we always try to find the one and only single correct answer. And sometimes, of course, it might be challenging to find that correct answer, but here in the field of philosophy or justice. Of course, that's not always possible. But nevertheless, just to give you to show you which concepts would lead to which example, to which answers. So according to Aristotle, most likely we would give the flute to Anne. Why? Because she knows how to play the flute. And I quote, the flute would presumably contribute most to the future development and exercise of human faculties. So that would be one argument why to give it to Anne. Again, keeping in mind that no one of you has voted for Anne. There is a different philosophy, which in this case, and we're going to see other examples later on, where in this case, this philosophy would lead to the same result. That would be utilitarianism, which basically tries to achieve the greatest good for the greatest number. So if she's the only one that knows how to play the flute, maybe all the others, if she does it correctly, all the others the happiness of all the others would increase, and that would be a reason why we should give it to Anne. Again, always assuming that she properly plays the flute. Otherwise, it would decrease happiness. If we would give it to Bob, mainly based on the reason that he does not have any other toys, that would be an egalitarian approach. And so you seem to favor this approach. So why we should give it to Carla? Because she's the one that has produced the flute. So either as a just dessert or else in the name of libertarian conception of just acquisition and possession. Again, there are no really right or wrong answers. It's different philosophies, and that's one of the questions that we always addressed at the beginning. If you remember the definition of law, there was the question if grossly unjust law would still be considered being law. So we hopefully most laws fulfill the requirement of justice, but it can also be the case that law and justice are separated in one example. And again, here we take the concept of justice to see whether law fulfills those requirements or not. So we have seen different reasons how a good should be distributed, and maybe you've heard about the term of distributive justice. And again, it's different approaches, and we cannot say that one approach is better or worse. It's just different approaches, and it's not like in law that we need to find one single solution, which of course is more important for the legal field. There are further questions, and we, as mentioned here, we're going to address them more in detail in the fourth session. But nevertheless, would just be interested to get your opinion. Do you think there are any limits to utilitarianism? So this concept of the greatest good for the greatest number. So that would have been the reason why we should have given the flute to Anne, because she knows how to play the flute. And presumably, again, assuming that she does it well, this would increase the happiness of all children or the whole family in this example. Do you think there are any limits to this philosophy? Most likely.
One limit is that, as in the example before, I can take resources from the people without consulting the people only because it's an interest of the community. And I think this is not fair.
Okay.
The concept of property.
Okay, so the concept of property, and a community cannot take the resources of one to give it to all the others. Yeah, and that leads us to a very tricky question, actually. When that discussion we have in, for example, in the United States, maybe more than here in Europe, whether it's really possible or just to that citizens or companies have to pay taxes, because you take from some, maybe some very rich ones. Let's assume you're the only rich guy in our community. All the others, all the rest of us, we are very poor. So would it be just to take away money from you, and obviously that would increase our overall happiness if we get money and you are the only one who has to pay for it because you're the rich guy. Is that just? Is that fair? No? Well, for you not. What about the other ones who would get the money?
Depending if we work or not.
Yes, let's assume, yeah, we can assume both situations. First situation you work, second situation you don't work.
If we don't work and do nothing, it's not fair because why we should receive money if we don't do anything?
And how much would you need to work? Working 5 hours a week, would that be enough?
No.
No.
8 hours.
8 hours at
Depends on
least?
the content on the work. That's I think is the limit. I cannot take how can I say? Every time I take a resource, I'm making something unfair. But there are some circumstances in which I can do it. For example, if everybody these resources are needed, for example, for saving one person or for saving the life of all the others, I can do it. If
Okay.
I'm taking it only because it's fair to share equally, I think it's not.
Okay, so there needs to be a reason,
Yeah.
and if you need a resource to save someone else, then you can do it. Yeah. Let's keep that in mind because we're going to come back to that question later on. What about this question? Is it just to throw Christians to the lions in the Roman Colosseum for the sake of overall excitement of an amusement of the Romans? Even if it seems funny, but let's try to find the underlying patterns. Because again, what we are trying to answer is the question, how to define justice.
It was a way to satisfy the people so that they don't organize a revolt against the power, so that the powerful guys could have the power. So it's only to satisfy the interest of
the elite. So you say it's in the interest of the elite only because they want to get people's attraction and so that they're not complaining about social circumstances, but that they find some amusement and therefore that's not just. Yeah. The question still is what would be the equivalent to throwing Christians to the lions nowadays? Yeah. That. The Hunger Games, yeah. Let's have a look at another question. And maybe some of you, at least those from Austria or Germany or Switzerland, have seen that movie. Is it just, have you seen it? No? Is it just to, so basically that's the situation that was discussed after 9/11 and during 9/11 they were facing this situation, I think with the third aircraft if I'm not mistaken. So let's assume we have a kidnapped aircraft and there are 164 innocent people on that plane. And let's assume that you know quite for sure that this airplane is going to be directed, so it's a German case in this television series or in the theater. And let's assume that this aircraft is directed into the Allianz Arena in Munich. So it's a, as you know, big football stadium. And there are more than 70,000 people in that stadium. And let's assume that you know quite for sure that they all are going to die. So the question is it okay to shoot the aircraft and kill the pilot, the crew, of course the kidnappers, but also 164 innocent people in order to save more than 70,000 people in the stadium? Okay or not okay?
Well, for me, I think it's not okay. I will never be sure of the fact that the people on the plane is going to die. I cannot decide for the life of these people.
So you're not sure that they would be killed, or
That they will be killed. That they will. I'm not sure the fact that the person on the plane is going to die because I'm not sure the fact that the plane will for sure crush the stadium.
let's assume you know for sure that it's going to hit the stadium.
In this
Or let's say, at least, let's assume it's quite likely, because you never know for sure. But yeah, that's a problem. But let's try to minimize the uncertainty, and let's assume you know quite for sure. So you're the politician to take the decision, and all your experts, of course, in very stressful situation, are telling you, well, the most likely situation is the aircraft is going to crash into the stadium, because that's exactly the direction they were heading to. Maybe you have additional information that leads you to the conclusion that they are aiming at the stadium. So, is it okay to shoot the airplane? Yes or no?
I don't think it's okay, because then you need to think about the future. You are going to deal with the families of all those people who you kill, and if people who died in the stadium, it doesn't matter how many they were. It's like it was an accident, not an accident, but it was like a tragedy or something, and it's going to be awful because people are going to die. But still, you personally didn't kill them. It's different. I don't know.
Okay, so your point is the following. There can be tragedies, and there are a lot of tragedies around the world, but the fact that someone directly tries to influence it, so it's not like a natural catastrophe, but if anyone can take the decision and actively tries to take a decision so that to decide whether the one group or the other would be saved, that's not acceptable, and therefore we should not take that decision, A, and if I consider it B, we also have to consider the families and all the circumstances, so therefore we should not take such an active decision. All agree?
I think that if you know that that plane will crash into the LS arena and you doesn't shoot it down, you will have also like responsibility, because you could stop of losing a lot of human life, and it's awful to say that I know if it's better, but I know it's damage for everyone, because those terrorists, they are already there.
Okay, so
the only way they got to out is dying.
yeah. So for the terrorists, maybe most people would have less of a problem, but on the other hand, we have two innocent groups: the smaller group on the aircraft, the bigger group in the stadium. And if your point was we should not take an active decision to kill the smaller group in order to save the bigger group, but nevertheless, your point is that does not mean that we should forget about the bigger group, and maybe we don't only have a responsibility for the smaller group, but we have the same or a bigger responsibility, or just a responsibility for the bigger group.
But the thing is, the people on the plane are dead anyway, whether they are killed by the pilot or they are crushed in the stadium.
Okay, so they would be killed anyway. Again,
I see those points, and they're of course right. But
yeah. But your argument is the people on the aircraft would be killed anyway. So therefore, why not? Why not kill them in a different way so that at least we can save the other ones?
yeah, but that's the thing. I mean,
okay.
There's no right or wrong.
There's no right or wrong, yeah.
no.
Yeah. But your point again is they are killed anyway, so why bother? Even if you admit that it's a difficult task.
I would say that there are three situations, like roughly.
Okay, three situations.
The first is no one died because people in the airplane try to, I don't know, kill the terrorists and make the plane land.
Okay, let me just repeat it for the camera. So first situation, no one is killed because the people inside the aircraft try to get rid of the kidnappers, and actually I think that's what happened or seemed to happen with the third flight with 9/11. Yeah. So first possibility, but that's a workaround.
Yeah.
So
It's really rare.
yeah.
Second situation, the population inside the aircraft, they all die in a crash or whatever.
So second possibility, that was your point. They die anyway, either because they are shot by a missile or they crash into the stadium. And third?
population A and B die. So A in the aircraft and B people on the floor, they die. So you have to choose. It's according to how much information the decision maker have. Like they have to choose if they can make the population A die to save the population B, or if they just let things like do nothing, and so you have to choose between the two situations, like population A die or population A plus population B die.
Okay, let me just summarize it for the camera. So we have the third possibility is that they would die. A would die. The smaller group would die anyway. Maybe also the bigger group. So in our case, those in the stadium would die. And so you have to take a decision always based on information that you have at this very moment. But the smaller group, in our case, inside the plane, they would die anyway. So not acting also involves some kind of responsibility. So you can, like in criminal law, you could be convicted for an act or for an omission, so for not having acted. So for example, if you see that someone urgently needs your help and you just pass by because you don't want to help, well, that could be a problem from the perspective of criminal law. And so you say we need to take a decision, and also not to take a decision is a decision in itself. And then if we compare only the smaller group, that would be dead anyway, or the smaller group plus the bigger group, why not save the bigger group, meaning those people in the stadium?
It just depends on, there's not just actions to make, it's only about how much information you have and what are these information.
Of course, the question, I agree, it depends on the information you have in that situation, and especially how likely it is that that information is actually true. Could also be wrong. And your second point, the second point of your statement, there is no just solution. So, and that's what we call a dilemma. So either whether you take solution A or B, it will always be wrong, or at least to some extent wrong. Yeah. But who of you would, again, keeping in mind all the difficulties, who of you would argue in a similar way as I think you have done it? Well, if the people in the airplane would die anyway, at least try and save those in the stadium. Who would agree to that statement? Okay, that is a majority. You disagree? Or you say there is no right answer?
Yeah, there is no.
Okay. So, yeah.
No, I would say like any presidents in the world, like if they know that the people in the airplane will die, they will shoot the airplane because they want to avoid what happened on 9/11. It's true.
Yeah.
Like nobody wants 9/11 again, and even if there will be like polemics and so on after it, I think they would shoot the airplane.
Okay.
If they're sure that the plane is going to crash.
But sorry, let me repeat that for the camera. So your point is any politician who would face a similar situation as in 9/11, or in that theater play that was, and here you can see the movie version, so to say, the television version. So any politician who is in a similar situation would have to shoot the airplane, or to give the order to shoot the airplane. Of course, he would not do it him or herself, because that's the only compelling possibility.
You save life.
Because you save lives.
Maybe an idea for reducing this problem could be to set a process. I said, if I try to give warnings and nothing happens, I wait till I put a jet behind the plane, and I wait, and when I'm sure that the chance that the plane is not crashing is truly minimal, only in this moment I take the decision.
Okay.
And I make
Yeah, but it's a very important point. So that apart from the substantive question, whether shoot the airplane or not shoot the airplane, so that also on a procedural level, similar as we discussed it in morning, substantive law and or substantive requirements and procedural ones. So also that we need some procedure in order to guarantee that we take hopefully the best solution available. Yeah. But again, if the majority of you states yes, it would be okay to shoot the aircraft. Again, coming back to the first question here, would that be? Anyone in favor of the first question? Meaning that yes, it's just to throw some people to the lions or whatever you might choose in order to amuse a bigger number of people.
It's not just, but at some point, sometimes it is the right thing to do.
So it's not just.
Not just, you cannot put the word just before all because you cannot decide for those 160 people you decide to play. But if you have to save so many lives, I don't think the word just is right there.
Okay, so so to summarize it, so here, so for the 9/11 example, it might be just to save the lives of a bigger group by sacrificing a smaller group. But if here it's about saving lives, for these examples, throwing Christians to the lions, it's just for the amusement of one group, and if it's not about saving lives, but just about amusement, it would not be okay.
The thing is that, okay, the Christians, anyway, they're going to be killed.
Who knows?
Who knows?
If the Romans would not decide to kill the Christians, they would
It was the-
live a happy life.
But it was the way that they did, like at this time, Christians were persecuted.
Yeah.
And
Sorry, very briefly to interrupt you, because you said they said, well, that's what it was at the times. Similar as we have seen it in the morning, of course. Maybe the Romans considered it to be just. Maybe the Christians not, but maybe the solution at the time was a different one. And so, similar as we had it for this Radbruch formula, for the example of the Nazi regime, of course, today we might judge that situation in a different way than it was judged at the time. But it's just a second component.
yeah, but if anyway they're gonna die in the first situation, it's horrible to being eaten by a lion. It's horrible. It's an horrible death. I would say that it depends on how they would be executed in the other situation they could face. How would they would be executed? But dying in an airplane crash and dying by being shooting inside an airplane, I would say that the second solution is the best way to die. Personally.
Okay, you say being shot in an airplane is better than being eaten by a lion.
Yeah, no.
Definitely, yeah.
Definitely, yeah. But I was just making a comparison. Compare.
Yeah.
In the second situation.
Yeah. So
the airplane, the solution of being shot by like dying in an explosion is fastest and way less painful for the person.
yeah, because it goes
Yeah,
quicker,
it's
and if you're eaten by a lion,
And if you crash,
Yeah.
it's horrible too.
Yeah.
I think it's horrible what you feel when you know you're gonna die. And in the first situation, it's not the same relation between the two possible deaths. So I would say it's not really not fair for the first one because it's horrible to die
Okay.
eating by a lion.
so you say being eaten by a lion is terrible, therefore it's not fair. But let's assume the Romans would be pleased if they would be killed, but very quickly. Would that change the whole scenario?
No, because it was only for excitement and amusement.
Okay, so you say no, it's not different if they
It's
don't.
not like other people is going to die. It's not like the second situation.
Okay.
Because in the second one you have the two populations, but in the first one you have just people who want to laugh.
Yeah. So amusement is not enough. Saving people's life, that could be a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
So now we seem to have an agreement. If it's about saving lives, we might sacrifice others, but not just for amusement. Yeah? Now consider the following example. Let's assume you. No, we'll take you. Let's assume you have a broken arm. Yeah. No, it's not broken. Yeah. But let's assume you have a broken arm. And have you already been to hospital? So let's assume you again have to go to hospital and for a checkup, and they have checked you and they have identified that you are a very healthy young man. So apart from your broken arm, you're perfectly healthy. And let's assume we have some other people in the hospital and they would urgently need some organs. Your liver, your heart.
Step up and we open the door and we go out.
So they would need you, definitely need your organs. So they
But I
decide.
want to live.
Sorry?
I want to live.
It depends on which.
Yeah, you want to live, but we have one person, that's you, with a broken arm. And if the hospital decides to kill you and take all your organs, everything which, let's say, is available and healthy, and that's why I've stated you're a healthy young man, let's assume you could save the life of 7 other people.
7 young women.
In that case. No, but no,
Would it be okay? And it's not for amusement. Let's assume if they don't get your organs, they would die. Let's assume we know that for sure.
because I'm healthy, I can go out and
Yeah, you're healthy. But what about the people in the aircraft? They were also healthy.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
why?
but they're gonna die.
I'm not going to die because of a broken arm.
Okay, you're not going to die, so
They are
that's
going to die because they are like missing an organ. See, someone that even I don't know, just arrived, has a heart attack and died there, and has all the other organs like useful. I would take out those ones and give it to them.
okay. So if we've found a compromise so far that saving people's life might be a reason, but amusement might not be a reason.
But
Uh,
you can't kill healthy people.
I'm not.
Yeah, but again, the people in the aircraft were healthy. Let's assume. Yeah.
To be die anyway.
Different.
But the difference is that the people in the aircraft, at least we assumed, or we were quite sure that they would have died anyway. But he is a healthy young man, apart from the fact that he has a broken arm, and therefore we should not kill him.
It's unfair to give me if I'm okay. I only have a broken arm.
Yeah. So you say that would be unfair if you would be killed in order to give all your organs, everything which could be needed, to someone else. Yeah.
The rule is to
So what's the rule? Yeah.
is to help with the what you have, is to help with what you have the person that are the most healthy. Like for firemen,
Yeah.
when they arrive, for instance, in a car crash, at a car crash accident, they go through each people, see which one has the most chance to live, and they cure him.
Yeah.
And that's the rule. You
Okay.
cure the person who you can the person you can save, and the person who has the most chance to live.
Okay. So let me just repeat it. So if there is an accident involving a lot of people, the fire brigade or whoever, they would decide who has the biggest chances to survive. If they have limited resources, so if they cannot save everyone or help everyone at the same time, and then they have to decide who has the biggest chances to survive, and then they would help that person. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the same
And
principle.
it's like people who work like in medicine or helping people, they always every day they have to make this choice, the same choice as this.
Exactly.
So there is a rule, I would say.
Okay.
Rule to this.
So as a summary, you would say there is a rule, and it's not only taking place in theater or here like in television. By the way, who of you has seen that film? Okay. So it was broadcasted on the same day in Austria, Germany and Switzerland. And I don't know whether you can read that, but here it says Finnish. And there were like 2 ends. So you were seeing the whole scene. It was like the court proceeding about the pilot that was convicted, or sorry, that was before the criminal court, and you were seeing all the information and the arguments from the public prosecutor and the arguments from the defendants, and then you had all the information as audience, and then there was a voting. You could call the broadcasting station, and then depending on the outcome of the voting, and the outcome was either he was not guilty, or like here, possibility 2, he was guilty. And then based on that voting of the people watching this on television, they had two different versions of the ending, and as you can see here, this one was for guilty, but in I think all Austria, Germany and Switzerland, the huge majority, it was like 86 roughly, so 86% of people in all three countries independently voted that the pilot, who actually, although the circumstances were a little bit vague, decided to shoot the aircraft for the very same reasons that we have just discussed, that he should be not guilty. And it's not only like in 9/11 or like in this situation that such decisions should be taken, but Dev, I'm very thankful for your point. So it's in everyday life we can be in similar situations, especially in medicine, whether we should take such decisions or not. Yeah. So, how to define fairness or justice? Who of you knows John Rawls? Yeah, so it's a very famous book about the theory of justice that he has written in the 1970s, where he tries to give some guidelines on how to define justice. Bless you. And maybe you've already seen some of the examples in this course have been taken from this book, a second book called Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do. That's a book written by Harvard professor Michael Sandel, where he tries to give examples which are very easy and everyone can have an opinion on those examples. And based on those examples, he tries to explain very sophisticated philosophical concepts, so in a very easily digestible way. So I can very much recommend also this book, but maybe that's for sure easier to read. So if we have now made a short excursus to the world of philosophy, let's come back to law, and especially EU law. And it has been mentioned by one of you at the beginning or in the morning that it also has to do about how what values our parents are teaching us. And of course, that, as we also discussed before, that can be different between different countries. Now, if you look at the level of the European Union, we also find certain values, and I have to say that's new since the 1st of December 2009, so the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, so one of the latest amendments to the EU treaties. And what I would like you to do now is have a look at this article, those two paragraphs, and you can see justice is also one of those values. And try to reflect in groups of two how you would define those values. And you don't necessarily need to do that for all of those values, but at least pick, I would say, at least 3 of those values. Very briefly, in groups of 2 or 3, try to see how you would define those values. Just to see if there is something like a common understanding of those values. Okay? So we'll have a...
The complete application.
No, what do you mean? What should be the meaning of those values? And again, you don't have to do it for all of them, but just pick, let's say, 2 or 3 randomly chosen, and decide how you would define those values. Let's see if you have a common understanding. 3-5 minutes.
What do you mean?
I think that the parents, the ones in the top are the ones in the.
I do. Yeah. In my
All those in the box.
system, I feel like it is.
All those in the blue box, yeah?
Interesting. I don't think it's the same.
But like not really.
But it's like,
Because what?
And this has been done like under the table. They try to make it pass like do not talk, avoid public opinion, on polemics.
Keep it in.
And I think that this happens like really often.
Really? So, is that democracy though, or is that like, that's more related to like privacy?
Yeah, but yeah, no, it's related to privacy.
So
they make pass laws without people wanting.
Okay.
That's not democracy.
No.
If the people's interest is not represented, why their decisions? It's not democracy.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not. So many countries that are doing that.
Pero también es como de ayudar a las personas, no dar nada con un desastre y que es más de ayuda.
Justin Trudeau? Yeah, but Trudeau.
I have a feeling that from my opinion that he seems like a cool person.
He is, yeah, he's a cool guy. I like him a lot. He's kind of, he's not like the most, he's not the most intelligent white guy, but he's giving the country a good face and like, I don't know, he cares about the right things, so I'm a fan. Really? I would not Yeah, she's like all over social media. Yeah. He's got a good
So what principles have you been working on, or what values?
We were talking about democracy.
Yeah. So what is democracy?
It's kind of, well, it's the, well, first off, the right to like vote and like.
The right to vote. Yeah.
What was your definition? It was
Well,
the power.
well,
So the Canadian definition is right to vote. The French definition,
demos come from demos and kratos, so power and people. So
power and people. Yeah.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
And it's my definition is that the people interest should be represented proportionally when the government takes decision as when the people's vote, and it's not always the case.
Yeah. So the
People's interest should be represented at the highest level of the
Okay.
administration.
representation of the interests of the people at the highest level.
Yeah.
So would it be right to conclude from your statement that at EU level only the European Parliament could be considered to be a democratic institution, because it's the Commission representing the interests of the whole EU. Parliament, yes, the interests of the citizens. Therefore, we could say yes, it's a democratic institution, but not the Council, because it's representing national interests. Would that be right? A right conclusion drawn from your statement, or?
It's really hard to say yes or no. It's true. There's so many.
Okay, but at least if democracy means
Logically speaking, yes.
yes. Okay, so
If all of the parties are represented at the European Commission, The European Union.
Yeah. So if all national parties are also represented at EU level, then
But
that would
proportionally, of course.
proportionally, yeah. Okay. What other values have you been? So yours was democracy.
We are allowed about democracy.
Okay, so democracy. What about you?
We talk about tolerance,
Tolerance. Okay. What's tolerance?
accepting and respecting other people's opinions and ideas. and beliefs
Okay.
Without necessarily sharing. Like,
Okay. Although you don't share
not
the
necessarily
attitude of
sharing,
someone else,
Yeah,
but tolerance means at least you respect it. Yeah?
yeah. Accept and respect.
But how far does it go? Would tolerance mean that the Romans that they need to accept the attitude of the Christians, the attitude of the Romans, that they are thrown to the Colosseum?
You take all so extreme.
Sorry.
You take everything so to the extreme.
Yeah, but it's not because it's my opinion.
Yeah,
so
I know.
just
I don't know.
okay, tolerance, respecting someone else's attitude at least to some extent, without having to define the extent. Yeah. Okay. What other values?
We talk about freedom.
Freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really hard because you're not really free to do anything you want.
Okay. We
If
don't.
you do something wrong, they just take away your freedom.
Yes, so not unlimited freedom, but there are some boundaries of freedom, yeah?
To some extent. I don't know. We didn't really come to a conclusion.
Okay.
It's really hard.
But would you say it's the freedom to do something or the freedom from some influence? Freedom, should it be primarily seen as the freedom to do anything to a certain boundary, and if you overstep those limits, then of course you have to face the consequences? Or is it rather freedom from being affected by anything that comes from the outside? Is it rather your freedom to do, or freedom to be protected from whatever stems from the government, or whatever, or
Maybe freedom to do.
rather freedom to do? Yeah. Were you discussing on freedom or also on another value?
Yeah, democracy, but kind of the same thing.
Okay, you agree with the French-Canadian
Yeah.
definition. Are you actually from
No.
French,
English.
English speaking? Okay. The two of you?
We discussed freedom, democracy, and equality.
Freedom, democracy, and equality.
Well, for freedom, we have kind of the same: to speak, to believe whatever you want.
Speak and believe whatever you want for freedom, yeah?
Democracy, like everybody has a saying, and everybody can run for a political career.
Okay, the right not only to vote, but also the right to stand as a candidate, yeah? So those are two components, yeah?
And in equality, we said that everybody gets the same opportunities and benefits.
Same opportunities and benefit. And how would you define same opportunities and benefits?
I don't know. Because we were actually thinking about that you should be treated equally, but that's kind of the definition for non-discrimination.
Yeah.
So we said that equality is kind of, maybe I can.
You could just state, yeah, because if you want to make it easy, you could just state, well, equality, that's the positive wording for what's negatively been worded as discrimination. So therefore, equality could just mean non-discrimination, yeah? If you want to make it easy, yeah. What about the Italian interpretation of EU values?
No, we discussed about freedom and
Freedom?
human rights.
Human rights, yeah.
And in particular about human rights, we think that they are minimal rights.
Minimal rights? In which way are human rights minimal rights?
Minimal in the sense that, how can I say, they are the minimum that must be guaranteed.
Okay.
In order for preserving basic needs, in order for guaranteeing basic needs, and for avoiding, how can I say, the exploitation, for example, by other human beings.
So a minimum level that needs to be respected by others, especially by the public authorities, I assume. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And if you say minimum level that needs to be provided, we have this distinction between political rights on the one side and social rights on the others. So would you also say that requires a minimum level of social rights in terms of healthcare provision and so on? So also here a minimum level that needs to be respected. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So what we did not have was human dignity. We had freedom, democracy, equality. We also did not have the rule of law. We had human rights, and the rights of minorities, of course, they are part of human rights. And then we had a society of pluralism. We already had non-discrimination. We had tolerance, justice we were discussing previously. We did not have solidarity, and we already had previously equality between men and women. What about solidarity? How would you define solidarity? And we're coming back to human dignity, and we can also discuss the rule of law. But how to define solidarity?
Solidarity is to care about other humans' problems and needs.
To care about other humans' problems and needs, yeah?
To help them as far as you can.
To help them as far as you can, yeah?
Because if you, it's only okay, you are concerned about the other's problems, but you don't help them. It's kind of the same. So solidarity is helping the other.
Okay, it's not only emotionally caring, but really actively helping and providing substantial support, yeah? To you, yeah? And we're going to see that in one of the last sessions when we talk about migration and refugees. And you all know that solidarity nowadays in Europe faces some problems. Maybe just very briefly, what do you mean? Does it mean the rule of law? What could that mean, the rule of law? And maybe the reason why no one of you has chosen the rule of law already means that it might be difficult to grasp. What could it mean, the rule of law?
That the law prevails
The law prevails over what?
over everything.
Over everything?
Different status.
Okay, so that you should not have different status like we had it in monarchy or in ancient times, yeah? So everyone should be, but isn't it then equality? That irrespective of your social status, you should be treated equally? And I'm not saying that you're wrong, but just trying to figure it out.
I understand the
Yeah.
difference. So rule of law maybe like the law prevails and you have to respect the law and something like that.
Okay, the law prevails over what, and who has to respect the law?
Our personal
Um,
no. You have the answer.
Yeah, but I'm trying to make you find the answer.
Yeah, but
No, but it's not. You're not so wrong. So the law prevails, but in which situation does the law prevail? And the law prevails over what? And that's why at the beginning was mentioned. You can always have different perspectives. You can have an economic perspective, a legal perspective, a philosophical perspective. You can have a political perspective or policy perspective. So the question is: the law prevailing over
everything.
all perspectives? Yeah. Maybe that's the approach that lawyers would like to have. The question if that's the best possibility. Now, if you remember the separation of powers as we had it at the beginning, I was telling you we have the parliament that makes the laws, and then we have the courts, the judiciary, and the executive power. And I was telling you that both, so if we have laws of the parliament, both the executive power and the judiciary, they have to respect the laws. And when I was talking about the executive powers, I was especially talking also about political parties, for example. And also the fact that political leaders, they are bound by certain rules. Mostly those rules can be found in the constitution. That basically is, again, very simplified, the meaning of the rule of law. Does anyone of you happen to know which country actually faces problems and they are accused by the European Union that they are not complying with the rule of law? the current example, one country which has been accused by the EU that they are not complying with the rule of law, which you can find in a lot of constitutions, and again you can also find it here in Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union.
Probably Turkey.
Turkey, yes, but Turkey is not an EU member state, but you're right that
They are trying to enter in the EU.
they are trying to enter, and thanks, that's a very good point, because not only for those who are actually members of the EU, they have to comply with those values, but also if you want to become a member, such as in the case of Turkey, of course they also have to comply with those values. But I'm not talking about Turkey, who is in the stage of becoming a member, but actually I'm referring to one of the current member states.
Former member state?
No, a current. Yeah, a current. I mean, we don't have any former member states, so Brexit has not yet happened. Sorry? No, Poland. So why has Poland been accused by the EU not to comply with the rule of law? Because, and similar as you described it before, because they are trying to change the system in a way which would be against the constitution, against principles which are generally accepted at EU level. And that's why at the moment Poland is under a process where the Commission is screening whether they are actually complying with this principle of the rule of law or not. So solidarity we are going to see later on in one of the next sessions. Hope we at least to some extent have clarified the rule of law, that also politicians or decision makers are bound by certain rules. They can not only make the rules, but they are also bound by certain rules. Last but not least, what does it mean, human dignity?
I know something about it. It's like, is that speaking about law, when you're in law context, dignity has 0 value, or maybe 1 euro value?
So you say dignity has a very zero value in the field of law,
Yeah.
but wouldn't that be a contradiction to what you see here? And yes? Yeah. So you say dignity has no value at all in the field of law, although here it's stated as one of the key values of one legal system, the one of the European Union.
This is why I said it.
Yeah. But why do you argue that law dignity has no value at all in the field of law? What?
My law teacher last year told me this. It was European law is like, for instance, if a picture of you is on Facebook and you don't want it to be on Facebook, you can ask for the person to take this picture out.
Yeah.
But you don't have to pay anything to this person, except if there's legal actions after. You have to prove that you have been hurt by this. And
Okay, so
it's another field.
okay.
He learned me that there was us, like the people in the class, that in law, dignity has 0 value, or maybe 1 euro. Like.
Okay, no role for human dignity to play in the field of law. The example that you gave, if you try to remove or have photos on Facebook being removed, of course the challenge there could be not that you don't have a right that those photos are removed, but maybe just that you cannot execute those laws, because if the server is in a certain in another country, it's always more challenging to execute, to enforce those rights. So maybe that's what your teacher was referring to, but I can tell you that just the fact that it's mentioned here in Article 2, and it's also no coincidence that it's mentioned as one of the first articles. One of the first value in Article 2, of course, means that human dignity should play a key role in this context of the European Union. And it's going to be in one of our next sessions that we're going to find out more about this concept of human dignity. And let's now have a second break, and after the break we'll continue trying to explore those questions. Okay, let's continue. Before the break, we have been discussing those values and the understanding, and you're going to see also during the rest of this course that some of those concepts might be difficult to grasp. So after now having contrasted law to fairness and justice, and I was very thankful that one of you was mentioning fairness in one of your responses, let's now have a look at law and morality. As you're not from Germany, most likely you would not know this case. It was a case of a politician from a conservative party in Germany, and he had a relationship with a 16-year-old girl. And the question is, if you assess that from a legal and from a moral perspective, what is your answer, or what should be the answer, and would it be a different one?
In Germany, it's 18 years old that you are like legally older. Like in Uruguay, it's 18,
Yeah.
for example.
Yeah,
In Germany, it's 18 too.
18.
Then from a legal.
From a legal point, yeah, and from a moral perspective, okay or not okay? No, not okay. If they love each other, yeah.
And we draw back.
So-
When it comes to love, everything is possible.
So the French argument is love prevails. The argument of some women is no, she's too young. She cannot fully assess the whole situation, so therefore she would need to be protected, yeah, and therefore it would be illegal, yeah. Any other opinions?
I think you have to see if she wanted to or not. So
I mean, of course, if she is
it was a
forced,
relationship, like a serious
Yeah.
relationship, then
so you are in line with the argument. If they are in love, then it would be okay. If it's a
Yeah,
serious relationship,
I know. I have a friend whose parents are 27 years old difference,
yeah,
and they've been together like since forever.
yeah.
And
So
like-
if there is a difference in age and if it works, why not?
I
Yeah.
will take even off the word love. If she's agree and is legal, it's okay.
Okay.
It doesn't mean only because there is a relationship.
Yeah, she has to agree. That's the thing.
That's,
Yeah.
that's the fact.
But she would also especially have to agree on the law, and
Well, they
Yeah.
should wait until she's
Yeah.
18.
yeah, but they should wait.
The
So
problem is connected with the fact that he was from a conservative party. That means if I'm representing
But-
a different value,
Yeah.
I cannot behave in a
so that would like double morality, so to say.
Probably the correct judgment could be he is not trialed, he is not charged legally, but he is kicked out from the party.
Yeah, that could be one solution. Yeah, but here the question is not for a political perspective. That could be the solution, that he would be kicked out of his party. But the question here is from a legal and from a moral perspective. And so that was a survey which is done by the German newspaper Der Spiegel. And he had stated sexual contact between a 14-year-old man and a 16-year-old girl, although they are legally allowed, but is that morally acceptable? And as you can see, of course, only not from all Germans, but from those who have been asked by the newspaper. So only 36% argued, well, that's okay from a moral perspective, and 58% argued, no, that's not okay. So that was the answer for this German case. In Austria, the situation would be the following. So you can see there are like up to 10 years of imprisonment for sexual relationship with minors. Minors in Austria for criminal and civil law, meaning less than 14 years. And here you can see up to 1 year of imprisonment for sexual relationship with persons under the age of 16 years. So there are different thresholds, but nevertheless, that would be the legal situation in Austria. So as we can see, so I'm just closing the door. So as you can see, law and morality don't necessarily need to correspond. And the question is always, what functions does law have to fulfill? And there are different functions, and it was taken from a German source, so therefore I have translated it into English. So one function of law is order. So for example, if you take traffic, I think in Uruguay you're driving on the right-hand side.
Here.
Yeah, so also right-hand side. But for example, if you take the United Kingdom or in Indonesia, if you drive on the left, India, yeah, or Indonesia, you're driving on the left-hand side. So law has a function of order, and for road traffic, it does not really matter on which side of the road you're driving, as long as everyone is driving on the same side and going to the same direction. So that's a question of order. And so here, the solution, whether it's A or B, doesn't really matter, but it's just a function to guarantee order. Another function would be fairness, so justice. And of course, it would be desirable that law also has a function of morality, and apart from its social function. In which way could law also have a function of power? Orders should be clear, fairness hopefully, but in which way could law also have a function of power?
Because the law determines what you can do and cannot do.
What who can do? Everyone?
In a certain way, yeah.
Yeah, so just rules, set up rules for everyone, as we discussed it previously for the rule of law, that it's not only rules for the citizens and for the companies, but also for the decision makers, yeah?
It has power on the punishments too for breaking the rules, or have the punishment the law wants.
Okay, so you can also be punished, as we had it at the very beginning. For the definition of law, there could also be sanctions, yeah?
For instance, in France, when there were the terrorist attack, something which is called l'état d'urgence.
Yeah, so emergency state, yeah.
Emergency state has been proclaimed.
Yeah.
And it gives full power, no, not full, but
More power.
Way more power to the policemen, the states to fight against the fact that another terrorist attack could happen. And this comes from law, and this gives more power to some people.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so like having two situations, like a normal state and then emergency state, like in the case of the French terrorist attacks, and giving more or less rights to, in this case, the government, especially the police, in order to tackle that situation. Yeah. If we said that law has a function to regulate power for everyone, similar as we had it for the rule of law. So, of course, law has also a function to maintain leadership, and that's especially a question of constitutional law, as we discussed it with this separation of powers. It's up to the constitution to decide which branch of powers should have more or less rights, and in which way they are checked by each other, and whether there is a balance. And of course, although all democratic states would have such a system of checks and balances, of separation of powers, but nevertheless it can be constructed in a different way. And so not only the function to maintain power, but as I also already stated, also to control power. So we have constitutional review processes, as I mentioned at the beginning, comparing the judiciary power, the courts, to the legislative power. So Parliament cannot enact any laws, but they are bound by the Constitution. And as we had it before, for the EU values, or any values of any society, of course, a Parliament cannot pass a law which is against human rights. And under normal situations, and as you pointed it out, of course, even under situations of where we have a status of emergency, nevertheless, certain human rights have to be respected. Of course, keeping in mind that there might be differences. And for example, when France declared this emergency state after those attacks, and now I'm not talking about the European Union, but about the Council of Europe. So this international organization that is located in Strasbourg. And so for example, they, as you know, might know, have enacted this European Convention on Human Rights, again, which is not only for the 28 member states, but for the I think 48 countries of the Council of Europe. And for example, in this case, France had to notify to the Council of Europe that they have emergency state, because that actually affects the way how human rights are respected, which rights you have as a citizen or a potential terrorist. I mean, you never know in advance. And so that would be one example for the control of power. And so it's not only about the executive branch, if they, for example, arrest someone, and the question which rights does this person have, but also constitutional review, as I said. So if Parliament passes a law, then although in a democracy they are representing the interests of the citizens, and they are the ones to make new laws, but still not in an unlimited way, but within the boundaries of national constitutional law. Checks and balances and separation of powers I have already mentioned. Can you think of any other functions of law? Or which one would you say is the most important of those functions?
There's no most important.
Okay, so there's no hierarchy, all being equally important.
Yeah, because if there's one missing, it doesn't work.
So they're all equally important, yeah.
Maybe some can have more impact.
So which one can have more impact?
Depends on the situation.
Yeah. So for the moment being,
Of course, power and control of power is no.
Of course-
order would be the most important.
order most important. Of course, if you are the one in power, you might have most interest in maintaining power, and if there is an opposing group, they might have a different approach. But I agree that all are equally important. But of course, as I would state that law also, at least to some extent, has to fulfill requirements of fairness. Because if that's not the case, then of course although law has been properly passed in a legitimate process, but if it's not representing, at least to some extent, elements of fairness, then the citizens would be against those decisions. Let's have, now we have had a look at law. Let's now have a look at law and morality and time. Again, it's taken from a German source, so therefore I'm just going to translate it to you. So if that have been some ancient times, and that's today, we can see here, according to this author, the influence of politics. As you can see, influence of politics in ancient times, we had very small groups who were giving them their rules. So influence of politics was very small at the beginning, and it increased during the course of time. And here, and of course, that's a very simplified overview, but according to this also here we had identity with morality. So the essence, the message is that at the beginning, law and morality were kind of the same. And during the course of time, morality in law has decreased equally as the influence of politics has increased. And of course, that's a very negative approach towards politics. And what he's also displaying here, that's the fields of law. And of course, at the very beginning, in ancient times, maybe there were only rules about family law, about trading, and so on. And as we've seen at the very beginning, nowadays with very sophisticated society, I'm not only talking about technical issues. Of course, there's a bigger field of laws that are actually required. Yeah. So let's have a look at morality and time, and we're going to come back to law and time later on. The European Court of Justice, although being very reluctant to take a proactive approach in the field of morality, nevertheless has decided, especially in cases about gambling, so that was Liga Portuguesa and BWIN, so those were cases about gambling in the field of sports, and there the Court of Justice basically decided as a bottom line that morality has a cultural, a regional and a temporal component. So morality of course changes over the years. It has an evolutionary character. It's different from country to country. So if again we remember the motto of the EU, united in diversity. So here of course we have a lot of diversity. And as we've seen, and we've seen the values before, and of course it's based on certain values. And again, although we have seen the European values in Article 2, and I've told you before that they have been, or they are part of EU law since the 1st of December 2009, so since the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty. But we now have those values enshrined in the EU treaties, but I think as we've seen from our discussion, it still might be difficult to fill those values with meaning and maybe, as you see, different regional component, there might be a different understanding in different countries compared to others. So, again, just to summarize it, so if you have a territorial, a regional, and a cultural component, a temporal component, and if we talk about morality, most of the times it's based on certain values. Again, the values in themselves can be different, but it could also be the case, and maybe that's the situation as we had seen it in our example before, that we are talking about the same value, so the wording could be the same, but still the meaning could be a different one. So if we have now seen law and morality and time, morality and time, let's now have a look at law and the evolutionary progress. Has any one of you seen that movie? Yeah, yeah, yeah. The second one, yeah. Who of you has seen the second movie? Yeah, almost everyone. Do you remember the court proceeding and the arguments that the lawyer Sam Leslie Jackson, I think that was her name if I remember correctly. Do you remember one of the arguments that she was putting forward in that court proceeding?
No, I remember what was the thing about him being a human being.
Yes, it was the question if he is a human being, yeah? And what were the characteristics of a human being?
Like able to love or something like that?
Yeah, one of the arguments was whether, or the fact that constitutes a human being, one of the arguments that was mentioned was that you make a contribution to society. And with in that regard, he was maybe not the best example because his contributions to society, if you remember, were not the best, so to say. No, but the arguments that she has brought forward in that proceeding were about the changing of society that maybe also involves the changing of law. And if you have been to Washington, D.C., maybe you have not only seen the building of the U.S. Supreme Court, but also the Jefferson Memorial. And if you can read here, and I quote, "I'm not an advocate for frequent changes in laws and constitutions, but laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress." And here, as it's stated here, there is a need to keep pace with the times. And the example that you have here, we might as well require a man to wear still the coat which fitted him when he was a boy, and therefore also society might have the need to change its rules if society itself is changing. So that, and the argument that was put forward by that advocate in that movie was, well, maybe if in recent times teddy bears that could talk and move and do nasty things were not considered to be humans, but maybe the law or the legal approach should change, and therefore they also now should be considered to be human beings. And of course, if the lawyer of the opposing party was able to put forward some precedent cases which decided that only human beings are should be considered to be humans, her approach was to get rid of those arguments by simply stating, well, we might have agreed on those arguments in previous times, but now the times have changed, and therefore now we should take a different approach. And so again, talking about law and time, there was a very interesting overview in The Economist 1 year ago. And what you can see here are some very controversial questions. Controversial questions meaning controversial for society, but of course also controversial questions that the courts had to deal with. And again, if we have a look at the separation of powers, it might be that the executive power has to deal with those questions. Of course, a parliament could be in a situation that they need to take a decision and adopt the laws because the society has changed. But especially in those situations where parliament maybe is not willing to take a decision, then it would not be the executive power but the judiciary power which would be confronted with any of those questions, again simply due to the fact that parliament, the legislative power, has not taken this decision. So the topics that you can see up here, so it's again just as you can see here, percentage of Americans saying they approve different sensitive topics. So that was school desegregation, abortion, marriage between blacks and whites, and same-sex marriage. And basically that was the reason why The Economist came up with this article called "Change is Gonna Come." Because this article tried to figure out roughly, and of course that's not in exact terms, but roughly which percentage of the society needs to change its attitude so that the US Supreme Court would be willing to change its case law. And that's very important, changing its case law, meaning the Constitution, as you might know, it's very difficult in the US to change the Constitution. So we have an unchanged legal document which is still the same, so the law has not changed, but attitude in society has changed, and therefore the court, in just interpreting those provisions, again of the very same Constitution, whether the court would also be willing to change its case law. And as you can see here, and I quote, "The Supreme Court rarely likes to get far ahead of public opinion, so they are not leading the discussion." And again, the question is if that should be the courts or rather the parliament, and I will also say rather parliament, that should take the change. Nevertheless, before issuing rulings giving rise to a major social change like desegregation of public schools, the legislation of interracial marriage or abortion, so this famous case from the 70s, the High Court judges, the justices, seem to like at least half of Americans to be on board. In this light, the justices' tones in the Obergefell opinions, so that was about same-sex marriage, owe much to the environment into which they were released. So if, as you can see here, the attitude of Americans towards a certain topic has changed, then also the US Supreme Court would be willing to take this into account. Again, always talking about the very same legal text. So it's not that the Constitution has changed. So let's last but not least, come to ethics and philosophy, after having talked about law, EU law, discrimination, fairness, justice, and now law and morality. And maybe first of all, we need to distinguish two terms, in this case, ethics and morality. Maybe before we do so, how would you define ethics and morality? Would you say those are the same terms, or do they have a different understanding?
For morality, it's like the way people should behave according to a certain population, according to where you are.
Yeah. So I just repeat it for the camera. So morality, how you should behave according to the rules of a certain society.
Yeah, and ethics, it's more about what can we do and what can we not do.
Ethics, what we can do and what we cannot do. Isn't that quite the same as morality?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
So I don't have the difference.
Okay, so no difference.
I think morality is more the way you are expected to behave. But
Morality, how you are expected to behave, and ethics.
is what he said. What you should do or not do.
But how you should behave and what you should do and not do, isn't that the same?
It's
No,
more
how you are you expected to behave? If you do it or not.
Yeah, but if you do it or not, that's a factual situation. So that's like if you, yeah.
No, I think that morality is an accent on, how can I say, the idea of the society.
Yeah.
What is the perception of your behaving? Instead, ethics is trying to be, how can I say, more philosophical or more scientific in saying what is, how can I say, absolutely right and what is absolutely wrong.
Yeah, maybe I would not use the term absolutely right, as we've seen before, but you are right that, and that's a different quotation from a book on bioethics. So you can see morality refers to norms about right and wrong human conduct. And remember, we also had this reference to human conduct for the definition of law. So norms that are so widely shared that they form a stable social compact. As a social institution, morality encompasses many standards of conduct, including moral principles, rules, and so on. And some of you mentioned it in the morning. We learn about morality as we grow up, and we learn to distinguish the part of morality that holds true for everyone, again, in a certain society, in contrast to moral norms that only bind specific members of a community. For example, you mentioned moral norms for people in the health field, sector, so you mentioned fire brigade, could also affect a medical doctor and so on. So there could be general moral norms or specific moral norms, but they would always be the norms that hold true for a certain society, similar as we have seen it in this definition of the European Court of Justice. And what is added here is the way how moral norms come into being. So similar as children are taught by their parents how to behave, how they should not behave, and although different parents might educate their children in a different way, but overall, most of the cases we have as stated, a consensus how you should behave in a certain society. On the other hand, as you mentioned, ethics, that's the theoretical or the philosophical approach of trying to explain not actually what's the morality in a certain society at a certain time, but rather the philosophical approach to explain what should be right or wrong. So in short terms, the philosophical approach to explain morality. I think we can leave out this example because to some extent we have already done it. That's a very famous trolley car example. So it's quite similar to the airplane example. So if you have the possibility either to save the life of 5 persons, or in this case to kill 1, and also here you need to take an active decision, because if you do nothing, this trolley car would continue and hit 5 people lying on those tracks, but you could actively take the decision and turn this trolley car to the side track. On the side track, you would only kill 1 person. So quite similar as our example for the kidnapped airplane. Again, all of them are innocent. The 5 lying on the main track and also the 1 on the side track. But again, the underlying question is quite similar. So whether you should take no decision, and also taking no decision in the end is a decision, or whether you should actively try to get the trolley car on the side track, where you actively would be responsible for having killed the 1 innocent, but at the same time you were able to save the 5. So, talking about ethics and philosophy, we can see here is just some philosophers. As you might, I have already mentioned Aristotle. I also have mentioned Montesquieu. I have not yet mentioned Kant, Bentham, Rawls, and I have mentioned Michael Sandel. So, big disclaimer, of course, that's a very short and simplifying summary. Nevertheless, I want to give you just some thoughts that you will need for the upcoming sessions. So again, it's not comprehensive. So what Aristotle is famous for is his virtue ethics. So this, if you have different virtues or different principles, you could also say his approach of finding a golden mean, a balance, as we have also heard it already before, between 2 different principles. So if you remember my example of non-discrimination on the one side, and the right to conclude a contract or not to conclude a contract and to choose your contractual partner, that would be private autonomy. And the reason why we have not found or don't have yet a directive prohibiting discrimination, as you remember, in a broad field of cases, that's simply because so far they were not able to find such a balance between non-discrimination on one side and private autonomy on the other. I think that if we cut it short, that's most important about Aristotle. Montesquieu, famous French philosopher, I already mentioned in the context of the separation of powers, and the book he has written on that issue. What else can you tell us about Montesquieu?
Not that much. But it's, I would say that it's not the spirit of the laws, it's from the spirit of the laws. The real French name is de
l'esprit des lois.
De l'esprit des lois.
Yeah. About the spirit. Yeah.
About or from, I don't know. But it was just...
Yeah, so about the spirit of the laws, yeah. Another philosopher that we might need for this course is Immanuel Kant. And again, if you remember our discussions, we were struggling with finding definitions for justice, and to some extent, we have succeeded, but still there were a lot of uncertainties. And one approach that he was offering was this so-called categorical imperative, which means that you yourself, when you have to take a decision, and we were talking about those dilemma, whether it's about the decision of a pilot in the situation we have described, or not only the decision of the pilot, but of the whole government or the Minister of the Defense or of the Interior, to take this decision. And his offer is act only according to that maxim, whereby you can at the same time will that your decision should become a universal law. And the question is if that would always help us. And the second very important idea that he is offering is that you should always act in such a way, I quote, that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. Or, as you can see here. And if you remember, that was one of the EU's values, where we did not really find a consensus, or no one of you was discussing it because I think it was difficult to grasp. So respecting human dignity for him means treating persons as ends in themselves, or in other terms, as subjects and not only as objects. And still, we need to take this idea and then transfer it to other fields. And again, here, persons don't just have a relative value, but if anything they have an absolute value, an intrinsic value. And if you remember, that was also one of the statements that you could see on this photo from the Jefferson Memorial, so that you have an intrinsic value. So the value is not given to you by the legal system, but it's already part of you as a human being. So that's the idea. We've also seen this concept of utilitarianism, so the greatest happiness for the greatest number. And that should be the measure of what is considered to be right or wrong. And why worrying about utility? Because, as it's stated here, whatever produces pleasure or happiness and whatever prevents pain or suffering, it's important to take this into account, because pain and pleasures are our sovereign masters. And therefore, he argued, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, that if those are the parameters which decide what makes us happy, and if that's very important for us, that's how we should decide whether a certain decision should be conceived to be right or wrong. And as you can see here, he was quite successful, actually. See, it's taken from another book. He had a lot of influence not only on policymakers, but also on economists. And utility is also an economic concept, of course, but also on business, executives, and ordinary citizens. Not only in the past, but even till today. Another philosopher that I've already mentioned in the context of justice, because that's a book he has written, A Theory of Justice, that's John Rawls. And we've already seen it in the discussions that we have had so far, that maybe in all the situations that we have discussed, whether it was about the price that women have to pay at the hairdresser, or whether it's about Italians that pay a higher price in Disneyland France, or Germans skiing in Austria. So you might always be biased in a decision that you take, because if you're Italian, maybe, not stating that that's the case, but it might be the case that you're simply biased because you are affected by the situation in itself. And so what he was offering was the so-called veil of ignorance. So the idea that if we try to think of a situation where you don't know what actual role you're taking in a society, or which status, you were also referring to the status of people. So if we try to get rid of all those components, and if we go through the veil of ignorance, then at this initial state, hopefully we can try to agree upon what would consider to be just and what's not just. So again, as you can see already from the title, it's about trying to find a definition for justice. And last but not least, and as you can see, so that's a current philosopher who is still living, Michael Sandel from Harvard University. And what he's actually doing, he's basing his philosophy on the philosophers or philosophies that we have seen so far. And what he's mainly arguing, and of course that's again very simplifying, very shortened, and I quote, "I don't think that freedom of choice, and we have also been discussing about freedom, even freedom of choice and under fair conditions, so I don't think that freedom is an adequate basis for a just society. What's more, the attempt to find neutral principles of justice seems to me misguided." Because he argues it's not always possible to define our rights and duties without taking up substantive moral questions. So what he argues is that we need to have certain moral values, and only if we have those moral values, this would then enable us to get to a certain solution. And I continue. A just society cannot be achieved simply by maximizing utility. So that's against the approach of Jeremy Bentham. Or be securing freedom of choice. To achieve a just society, we have to reason together about the meaning of the good life and to create a public culture hospitable to the disagreements that will inevitably arise. So that's the idea of having the need to talk to each other, to have a dialogue, and only if we have such a dialogue, then we can have a consensus and try to shape those values and to shape the meaning of justice or of morality. Otherwise, he argues that this would not be possible. I'm now going to skip this slide. We are going to come back to this later on. Basically, that's it. So hopefully we now have a common understanding about law, EU law, law and justice, law and morality, morality and ethics, and different philosophical approaches. Always keeping in mind that all those statements were very simplifying. So there will always be more to go into details, and of course to a lot of principles there would be exceptions. So therefore a big disclaimer, but nevertheless I would say that's the most important that you should need as a basis for the upcoming sessions, where we are going to discuss different topics, starting with affirmative action tomorrow, followed by surrogacy, the moral limits of markets, and migration. And yeah, thank you for your attendance, and I hope that you can technically access Adobe Connect tomorrow. So as I stated before, please try to make sure in advance that it works, and see you, so to say, tomorrow in our online session at 5 p.m. Thank you.